And before we even get started, I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm a therapist at Sunstone Counseling in Falls Church. We have that office right by the State Theater. And I specialize in working with adolescents and adults from a mind-body integrative perspective. So I really emphasize helping people access their innate strengths in connection with their body to help them find long-term healing and growth and transformation. I am a postpartum support Virginia preferred provider as well. A large body of my practice is working with women struggling with fertility through the postpartum period, as well as working with folks who are dealing with chronic stress, anxiety, depression, OCD across that mental health spectrum with underlying things such as past trauma and grief and loss. So what I'm going to do today is weave in some of those elements from the mental health perspective, really focusing on that idea of what is stress, how does it impact and shape our minds and bodies, and then how do we practice what I like to call in my work accurate self-care. How do we find ways to take care of ourselves that are really meaningful and are a good fit for our actual needs? So we're going to talk all about those things this evening. Before I even get started, though, I really encourage everyone to have something to write with and something to write on. It can be a note on your computer. It can be like an old receipt, like it really doesn't, whatever you have accessible, grab it. Because what we're going to do during our time is I'm going to have a couple self-reflection breaks. These are just independent times to drop in and check in with yourself. I'm not going to ask anyone to participate or share. This is really a time for you to engage in what we're talking about to help this time itself be restorative and meaningful for you, right? The last thing I want to do is be like, your old high school professor showing you a lecture. That's, I don't think any of us want to go back there unless anyone here is a high school teacher and we value you and you changed all our lives. But right, we don't need this time to be that. I hope this can be a restorative, engaging time for you. So what we're going to do is do this check-in. I'm going to, again, walk you through the first self-reflection point. We're going to talk about stress and the different responses we have from a mind-body perspective. I'm going to talk to you all about what self-care is, how to practice successful self-care. That's a bit of a tongue twister. And then we're also going to practice some of those skills. We'll touch base on some key takeaways, and then there'll be time for a Q&A. So when we're going to open our time together today, I'd love to model for you what accurate self-care looks like. And we're going to do that throughout our time today. So before engaging in any activity, whether it's pivoting from doing at-home school with your kids to jumping into your workday, or whether that means transitioning from your workday into dinner with your family, whether if it's you're living alone, transitioning from just simply moving through different elements of your day, taking some time to touch base with yourself as you make those transitions is a really healthy part of stress reduction. So we're going to practice some of that here. So I'm going to guide you through an exercise. I'm going to give you lots of options. And if this exercise isn't a fit for you, that's actually really good information, right? It's just as important and helpful to know what doesn't work for you as what does. So I just want you to take a moment here to pause. Your eyes can be opened or closed. It's going to depend on what helps you feel safe and comfortable in your body. And I want you to find a deep, full breath into your belly space. You can put a hand on your abdomen if that helps you connect with that part of the body. You might breathe in and out through the mouth, or in through the nose and out through the mouth. Maybe if you're ready for even more breath, you might breathe in through the nose and out through the nose as well. So as you're breathing here, I want you to ask yourself what you need from the next 50 minutes. Not what you think you should take away, or what your spouse or your roommate or your parent says you should take away, but what is it that you want to take with you from this time? And take 3 more deep rounds of breath just to really seal that in your mind. Really say, okay, this is what I'm going to take with me. I'm going to keep my mind and my heart and my connection fueled and pointing towards this goal. Once you're done with your third breath, simply open your eyes and jot down what it is that you came up with of, okay, this is what I want to take with me. We're going to come back to it at the end. I'm going to ask you how well we did. So we're going to move now into our first self-reflection pause. Again, if you want to comment in the chat, that's perfectly fine, but this is not designed to be a back and forth. This is really just a time for you all to touch base. I'm going to talk later on in our presentation about this concept called emotional agility. And when we're talking about combating and restoring the mind and the body from stress, emotional agility is one of the key ways that we do that. And what studies show us about how to increase emotional agility is by using a practice of journaling, right? It doesn't have to be, Dear Diary style, but that idea of taking time to write out our thoughts and our feelings has been shown to improve the amount we can identify our own emotions and manage them effectively. So we're going to engage in some of that just during our time today. So when you're done with this hour, you can already say, I've been practicing emotional agility. So just ask yourself, what are some of the indicators that you notice in your day-to-day that are kind of telling you I'm feeling stressed? And then ask yourself, okay, what's similar about the way I'm feeling right now? And what's different about the way I'm feeling right now than how you may have felt earlier in the pandemic, earlier in the year? What's the same and what's changed? I'm going to give us just, maybe half a minute here just to touch down. And on indicators you've been feeling stressed, right? This is just a time to stream of consciousness, let this flow, right? If you've been irritable, if you've been having trouble sleeping, if you've been having a change of appetite or energy level or work performance or school performance or parenting challenges, right? Let that stuff flow. Just take a quick check-in. And this is all important, right? And why we're doing a check-in like this is because we know that our lives have changed dramatically since February, March of last year, right? Almost a year from now, right? And we don't magically acclimate to those changes. You're not supposed to be able to snap your fingers and know how to live in a pandemic or a national crisis or, through great periods of challenge. It's not supposed to be automatic. And because we're doing this in a pandemic and the nature of the pandemic, a lot of our normal ways of helping ourselves or coping or practicing self-care aren't available to us because of the parameters that we need to have in place to keep each other safe from COVID. So, right, our emotional capacity and our stress response and our resiliency ebbs and flows. And all this is doing, right, is helping you check in with what's that's been like for you. So now we're going to talk a little more about what stress is and how it relates to uncertainty. So stress is a normal and healthy reaction. I mean, I think if this is one thing you take away from tonight, it's that stress is a healthy, normal response to typically an abnormal, uncertain event that can make us feel a lack of control or powerless or any kind of distress. Right? So this is a common and universal experience, right? If you're not stressed, you're not human, right? This is a healthy, adaptive response that we have developed as human beings to survive. So you are not alone, right? I mean, we're all here tonight talking about this, right? I'm a therapist, right? So this is what I do for my living and my passion, right? We are stressed, and that's a healthy, normal response. It's when it becomes out of balance that we pay attention. So when we talk about stress, it's really this umbrella. And something that helps specify is saying, okay, what are the elements underneath this stress umbrella that are indicators to you? Right? So practicing that level of specificity is helpful. So underneath that stress umbrella, right, there might be stress, anxiety, fear, sadness, loss, grief, anger, frustration, concern, hopelessness, and powerlessness. All of this is part of that umbrella. And it doesn't mean, right, you might be saying, okay, well, I'm not feeling incredibly anxious, but I have noticed that I am sad more days than not now, or I'm feeling this really itching sense of irritability. That's a natural part of that stress umbrella. So we also know that the body reacts to this, that our minds and our bodies aren't separate, right? It's not like, right, just our neck separates these two things. They're these interwoven, interconnected systems that rely on one another for data and feedback and understanding of our external stimuli, right, the world around us, and how we feel on the inside. So one way we can start to increase our awareness to that and understand a little more about what stress does to the body is focus on what's the function, right? So I often teach my clients in the first couple of sessions we meet is we're going to start asking each other, WTF, right? Like not the flip or whatever, right? The F normally stands for, but what's the function? What is the purpose? What is the signal? What is the message that this thought, feeling, or behavior is trying to send to me? Right? Because all of these emotions and reactions are messengers to us. They give us that important information. And the piece that's going to be part of what we're talking about today is we don't want to ignore that information, right? Many of us are trained when we feel stressed to push through, right? Have another cup of coffee, right? Have a glass of wine after work, watch, hours of reality TV. Actually, reality TV is one of my coping skills, but I love it, right? We can do things that either help us numb out or binge or escape. If we don't listen to those signals, that's where we want to tap in and challenge ourselves to practice self-care. So this brings us to what we're going to be focusing on, right, all throughout this time. Is this means we have to practice awareness and acceptance, right? So awareness is those skills of mindfulness, and acceptance is not the same as approval, right? So when I'm talking about acceptance today, it doesn't mean that we're giving this a big, seal of like a gold star or a stamp of saying, okay, this is all great, right? We should be fine and thrilled that we're homeschooling. We should be totally okay with our added workload. We should be totally okay under national pressures, right? From a very heated election or racial injustice, right? We should be okay. It's saying, okay, I need to accept that this is happening to me. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what stress response overdrive is. So, right, when we understand that stress is this healthy, normal experience, if it's kept in balance, here's the flip side of that seesaw. Is what does it look like when stress becomes unbalanced and it starts to impact us in a negative way or in a way that impacts our functioning day to day? So I'm going to go through this list, and what I want you all to do with whatever you have to write with is just quickly jot down what you recognize in yourself, right? What's showing up for you? You could say what's showing up for you within the last 2 weeks, or you could say this is just what I know about myself historically. So stress response overdrive, again, is it's a studied, it's a real thing. These things aren't made up. You're not being weak. You're not being tough enough. This is a very real experience. And stress response overdrive is triggered by our environment outside of ourselves and the environment inside of ourselves. So what I mean by that is if you're living in a country during a pandemic, that would be an external trigger. An internal trigger might be something like mom guilt, right? Feeling like you're not being a good enough parent. You don't have the color-coded homeschool chart, right? That would be an internal stimuli, that feeling of guilt. So again, stress can be triggered by either end of the spectrum, often by both, that outside stuff and that inside stuff. And overdrive can be at either end of the spectrum again. So all these things are on a spectrum. Overdrive can look like the person who is really in hyperdrive, right? Someone who might on the outside look really anxious, on edge, irritable, high energy. That could be one end. Stress response overdrive also looks like those times where all you want to do is lie in bed all day and you're having a hard time doing anything but reading a book or drinking a cup of tea, or, even more than that, feeling really sluggish and downtrodden. That's all experiences of stress response overdrive. So, right, it covers everything from feeling unmotivated, fogginess, feeling tired, feeling sluggish, difficulty concentrating, spacing out. Reduced capacity and bandwidth means something that you might have been able to do, which is crazy to think about, January 2020, right, where you might have been able to go to a spin class, go to the farmer's market, go to your kid's soccer game, go to dinner with your family friends, and do a couple loads of laundry. Your capacity now might be, I can go for a walk around the block. I can take my kid to the COVID version of a soccer game, and I can maybe get some dinner on the table. That's what reduced capacity is. Just like internet bandwidth, right? Like if everybody's on your wireless at home, you got reduced bandwidth. It's the same for us. If we're running all systems all the time, we're going to have reduced bandwidth. Can't stop being busy. Difficulty. Oh, I have difficulty concentrating on here twice. Maybe I had difficulty concentrating when I was stressed writing this. That's funny. Hyper awareness to sound and sight, right? You might be noticing like, oh, this TV is too loud, or it's too bright in my office. Again, irritability, being on edge, strong surges of emotion, and often being on the verge of tears. So when we're imbalanced, right, when we're in a healthy state of stress, these signals might pop up here or there, but we're able to respond to them and even them out. right? When we're out of balance, we're not sure of how to respond to these experiences. We're not sure maybe what we need to do or what we want to do to help take care of them. So one thing that you can model, right, just as I said, go through and circle what shows up for you, right? I didn't say like which of these experiences is right and which of them is wrong. It's important to be curious with yourself, not as critical, right? We want to be like little, like people on a safari, right? There used to be a really cute Snapchat filter that would make you look like a little baby safari person. I think of that often, of like, we want to be in like a cute little hat with a magnifying glass, like trying to peer and figure out, okay, what's happening for me? So, we're going to go through and talk more about how stress response overdrive shows up and what different types of stress are. But again, when we're thinking of those curious, not critical mindsets, as we look at a list like this, we're asking ourselves questions like, okay, why can't I just push through, right? Like that's got a critical edge. And we want to know, okay, well, why is it important to me to push through? Who's telling me I have to keep pushing? What would it be like to rest? Another way you can tap into yourself is you might be saying to yourself things like, okay, I used to be able to manage so much more. What's wrong with me? Right? That's a light bulb moment of you're in stress response overdrive. If you're asking yourself more often than not, what's wrong with me? I really want you to tap in and say, okay, what's changed in my life and what do I need? Because I can almost guarantee you there's nothing wrong with you, right? You're responding to an absolutely chaotic, overwhelming life experience. And you might also be getting hooked in comparison thoughts, right? When I look at this stress response overdrive in myself or in my clients, I often have people saying like, okay, but my, so-and-so friend from high school on Facebook seems to be doing it all. She's still doing all her Peloton classes. She's giving all these presentations at work. She's decorating her home. Like what in the world, right? That type of comparison mindset can also be a signal we might need some extra backup in terms of stress response. And lastly, if you're saying something to yourself, like what's going on with me? I feel like I'm losing it, right? I really want you to take that moment and be curious and say, okay, what is making me feel this way? And how can I get some support? Which of these stress response overdrive signals am I seeing and experiencing? So when we talk about short-term versus long-term stress, the most important overarching thing is that we right now are not in a period of short-term stress. We might have short-term stress day to day, but in, January 25th, 2020, we are in a period of cumulative long-term stress. We are not in a recovery period. I think a lot of us, myself included sometimes, right, we feel like, okay, well, I've been here long enough. I should have adjusted by now. Absolutely not, right? This has been a drop in the bucket in terms of our lifespan. So it's really important to notice that this is currently a period of high stress, even though we've been in it since February, March of last year. So that's an important piece to know. We're also talking about stress that doesn't have a defined endpoint. So we're in a period of high stress that we don't know how and if and when it's going to change. So we're having to adapt to a totally different lifestyle in addition to a totally different style of coping, because so many of what we would normally recommend or engage in is radically different. So short-term stress is all about survival mode. This might be when we're talking about those animal instincts like fight, flight, or freeze. Right? These are triggers that might pop up during your day, and they tend to be shorter in duration. In this, we would consider focusing on the threat, right? Your body wants to react and respond to the environment. So that's saying, okay, when you're feeling fight, flight, or freeze, how do you recognize what's triggering you and how do you help soothe yourself or give yourself safety? Long-term stress is a little different, right? Because we're in an endurance mode, right? We're in a period of time where we know I'm going to need to sustain a certain level of energy over a long period of time. We could think of this, right? I'm in drive mode. I'm having to exert a lot of energy and endurance. That might be caregiving for a loved one with cancer. That might be, going through a difficult period of time at work over a number of months. That might be going through a pandemic, right? All of that is prolonged stress. And in that stage, we encourage people to focus on the response, right? Okay, if you're not going to be able to target every trigger, so how can we help you respond effectively to that type of experience? An added layer that can show up in both short-term and long-term stress is what's called cumulative stress, right? A combination of multiple stressors over a period of time, right? And that's smack dab what we found ourselves in, right? We've got pandemic, we've got school closures, we've got, death and dying and family dynamics and caregiving. We've got national political crisis regarding racial injustice, right? We've got on top of that a highly contested election, on top of that a coup, right? Like that is a ridiculously large amount of cumulative stress. So that's when we start talking about, okay, how do we practice active recovery through self-care? So when we're talking about how do you know which type of stress you're in, I've just listed a couple questions below. And I think everyone might, we can watch, you can always watch these back, and I'm happy to share the slides with anyone. If my email's at the end of the presentation, you're welcome to reach out to me and I'm happy to share these. So factors to consider when you're trying to understand what type of stress am I in, it's asking yourself, how long have I been experiencing this stress? How am I perceiving it? Am I feeling like I've got some control and some agency, like I can make some change? Or am I feeling powerless and helpless, or that everything is out of my control? You want to ask yourself again, how much control do you have over it? Do you feel like, perhaps it's a situation with your boss over your hours? Are you able to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm trying to do, support my kids at home learning from, 3 to 5. Can I, start work a bit earlier in the day and be done by 3? Or can I take a break from 3 to 5 and hop back online at 6 or 7, right? Do you have the power to coordinate with your supervisor, or do you feel overwhelmed and that there isn't that access or resources? Another one is how satisfied you are with yourself, right? With how you're coping. Are you feeling, when you check in with yourself, saying, hey, like I'm doing a pretty good job, I'm doing my best? Or are you really feeling burned out and overwhelmed or self-critical? And that last one is how much support you have. And this one is key, right? I'm talking all tonight about things you can do individually, but something that's always going to be woven in here is the strength of our relationships, and how much we don't have to go this alone is really important. So checking in with yourself of, do I have people I can ask for help, is really meaningful. So then again, just kind of continuing down this road of what these different types of stressors look like. We always want to come back to whatever you're feeling, no matter where it lands on the spectrum of stress response overdrive, emotional spectrum, whatever, it's a healthy response to a true disaster. Right? We are living in a literal pandemic, right? No matter where you fall on this stress spectrum, no matter how you answered any of those questions I just listed of what you can consider, it's normal and it's healthy. The other piece, and this is why self-care becomes so important, and what I'm going to have you all do a quick check-in on in a moment, is that stress tolerance is not an infinite resource. We don't have an infinite capacity within us to carry all kinds of stress. We have a limited capacity to carry stress in our bodies, minds, and our emotions, right? And it's called this thing called allostatic load. That term doesn't matter too much, but all it indicates is this is a researched and documented concept in stress response literature, which says we can kind of view our stress response, our abilities that our minds and our bodies have to adapt to it, a bit like a seesaw, right? Of all those factors I considered, if you have a couple that balance out on the positive side, but you have a couple on the negative side, are you in somewhat of a balance, right? That's something called allostasis, right? Are you in this homeostatic balance type of space? If those detracting components, like you don't have power, it's overwhelming, it's prolonged, it's adding up, start to outweigh the positive factors, right? That indicates how much stress can your body carry in that allostatic load. And that is not something that you can snap your fingers or do a face mask or drink a green smoothie and increase all at once, right? It's a physical, chemical combination of everything from your endocrine system to your neurobiology, to your gut health, to your social health, to your emotional health. So when the demands on our internal resources exceed our capacity to cope, our capacity to deal with what's being asked of us from our lives, that's when stress overload sets in. So that might sound negative, but the point of that, right, is to say that we aren't magical creatures that are supposed to adapt to cope to everything. We do need time to recover and heal ourselves, and that's a critical component of self-care. And that recovery element is a renewable resource, and that we do have an innate natural capacity to be resilient, right? None of us would be here on this YouTube live, frankly, if we weren't resilient, because all of the people here have found time to prioritize themselves, take time to watch this. That's an indication of your strength. So we're going to be focusing again on normalizing that you are not supposed to be able to cope with everything all at once, and that you have the capacity to help yourself recover and heal. So let's do a quick check-in. Ask yourself, how do people in your family and in your culture respond to stress, difficult situations, and traumatizing experiences, right? What we're going through right now is a collective trauma, right? Going through a pandemic, again, racial injustice, a highly contested election, a coup in our backyard, that's trauma, right? So how are you trained in your upbringing and your culture? How do people respond to that? And growing up, what are some of the messages you might have received about self-care and asking for help or support? Did you get a lot of thumbs up? Did you get some hesitancy? What's some of the feedback you got about that? Hmm. And again, all of this is not that there's one right way to respond or a wrong way to respond. The point is to really challenge yourself to get to know you, right? To know going into, as we start to talk more about the mental health impact of chronic stress, and we talk about self-care and coping, what are some of the filters you're going to view this information through? What are some of the filters you're going to experience stress and self-care through? Again, right? It's all about this awareness and acceptance. How can you pay attention to what's going on for you, and how can you acknowledge that it's real? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about identifying depression and anxiety. You know, the key to both sides of these is depression and anxiety activate the same space of the brain, right? They're a bit like cousins, and they're on a spectrum, right? And I think spectrum might be my word of the day, right? All of this stuff is on a spectrum. None of it's black and white, and it's all going to show up a little bit differently for each of us. So the key for all these things I'm going to talk about of depression and anxiety is that it's going to be different for everybody, and it's going to fall along a spectrum of tolerable and okay, all the way to this is intolerable, I can't survive this, right? So the most important thing to be asking yourself and to be looking for in your loved ones or your friends or whomever is that, is my mental state getting in the way of me living well and the way that I want to live, right? Is my mental state getting in my way? Is a great question to ask yourself, right? How is it impacting my functioning at home, at work, at school? How is it impacting my physical health, and how is it impacting my relationships? So, right, on this depression side, these are some of the classic depression symptoms, right? And again, they're going to look different for everybody, right? That persistent feeling of down, isolating yourself, right? And some people, I've done some depression assessments with clients, and they laugh every time I ask, like, how can I isolate myself? It's literally like required by the CDC to be socially distant. And that's true. And like a good, bit of irony and sense of humor. But there's that element of, are there people in your life that you would normally connect with that you either don't have the drive to, or you really can't imagine the idea of wanting to call a friend that you would normally call, or, phone your parents, or touch base with a work colleague? Are there people or spaces in your life that you would normally reach out to that you feel like you just don't have any interest in? Changes in your sleep, sleeping too much or not at all, getting angry or irritable more than usual, being moved to tears more than usual, and changes in your appetite. Again, this can be really feeling like, oh, I'm like just not hungry really at all anymore, or I'm really only craving, really bland foods or only really specific foods, all the way to, I feel like I can't stop eating. I'm hungry all the time. I never feel satisfied. All of that is a change in appetite. Again, on the other end of the spectrum, we see anxiety, right? This arousal piece, right? Depression is that feeling, right? That slowing down, right? What we would call hypoarousal, right? If we're on this baseline, depression dips below, right? And anxiety dips above, right? So that's persistently feeling stressed, on edge, or fearful, having the experience of racing thoughts, difficulty focusing, staying on task. Again, changes in your sleep, changes in your appetite, and avoiding upsetting or stressful situations. And again, right, frankly, we can put depression and anxiety on the same line, and all of these symptoms would coalesce and collide. So you might be feeling like, okay, well, I've got a little bit from each side. That's really normal. And again, there's no right or wrong. And if you're seeing yourself on these lists, I really encourage you to reach out for help, right? NAMI is an excellent resource for referrals and support. I'm happy to help connect you with a counselor and provider as well. And again, I have all my contact information on that last slide. So if you're seeing yourself here, asking for help is the next best step. So now as we pivot into this self-care component, we know a little bit, right, about the lens that you come from, right? Okay, what does your family and culture say about dealing with difficult situations? And what are some of the messages you might have received growing up about asking for help or self-care, right? That's this lens that you're coming from. We all have a lens and a filter. Now I want you to touch down in the present, right? Of how would you normally, as if there's ever really a normal, cope with difficult times or changes in your routine? What do you do normally? Would you seek out alone time? Do you go to that extra yoga class? Do you call friends and go to dinner? Do you go, knit a new sweater? What would you do to normally cope in different times? And how is that impacted by the restrictions that we have with COVID? What would you normally do and what's changed? Because again, right, a lot of our normal ways of supporting ourselves either aren't available or have had to be altered significantly. So let's just go into this with a clear and open mind. Okay. So when we're talking about self-care, again, much like stress, is a really large umbrella. And under self-care, we've got things like coping, we've got things like learning skills and tools, we've got things like mindfulness, acceptance, self-compassion. There's lots of, even like exercise and cooking and time with friends and family. That's all under this self-care umbrella. So there's no one magical definition of self-care. And if, something I don't talk about today, you are like, well, I really feel like that's my version of self-care. I'm pretty willing to bet that that's accurate. So talking about self-care, the first thing we got to recognize, right, is we can't change what we don't notice, right? We can't provide care for something we don't know is causing us harm or difficulty. So good enough self-care does not have to be complicated or expensive, right? A lot of what gets marketed to us as self-care from, whether that's Instagram or TV or any form of social media is self-care to an extent, but as a mental health professional, right, that's not maybe what we would consider top of the list self-care, right? You don't have to go buy an expensive face mask or, face roller. You don't have to go, buy an expensive new sweatsuit or, a new subscription to some app or some, streaming service to be practicing good self-care. So this image on the left, I love. This is from James Clear. He's a really wonderful writer who talks a lot about habits and habit change. And if you haven't looked into him, I recommend that you do. Some of his stuff is not, 100% wonderful, but a lot of his stuff is pretty useful in terms of demystifying how to change your habits and taking a lot of the self-blame and self-criticism out of the process. So, right, your body, right, this vessel that you carry around your brain in and your heart and all of your important stuff. This is your vessel, your bucket. And lots of things go into our bucket and lots of things come out of our bucket, right? So we're going to first look at that bottom part where that tap is, right? So these are things that drain us of our energy, of our vitality, of our wellness, of our health, right? Of just that sense that gives us our spirit and our liveliness, right? These are things that drain us, right? It could be physical training, it could be work or school, it could be stress, right? Out of your bucket, right? I'm trying to what would be out of my bucket today, right? I got a long day of work, but I'm looking forward to being here. So that's going to fill me up. I've got, chores to do. I've got living in a pandemic, right? I've got navigating all kinds of stuff that would be draining my bucket. And what we need to notice is when we're in stress response overdrive, more is coming out of our bucket than is going into it, right? So that tap at the top, and that top left corner is a bit of what we talked about a couple slides ago of recovery, right? Your bucket is not a renewable, refillable, spontaneously resource, right? You can't cut off that tap component, right? We can't cut this off, this portion, and then magically refill this bucket. We need to have some kind of recovery coming in to help us balance stress out. Right. And I love that James Clear puts that very simply put, right? Sleep, nutrition, recovery, right? We need to start with the basics, your sleep, your diet, and your relationships, right? And you are starting ridiculously small, right? I tell my clients, like, think of a baby step and then like cut that by half, right? So that means like, okay, if you are noticing that you've had a really low appetite and you haven't been fueling your body with healthy foods, that might look like, okay, can you eat one hard-boiled egg a day? Can you eat a half an avocado a day? Can you have one banana a day? We're not saying like go out, make a meal plan and make 5 salads to eat for lunch. Can you start really tiny, giving your body some fuel to help care for it? So that act of identifying a change or even making that very small pivot, even if that's acknowledging what isn't working, is a really important aid in terms of turning on that tap to help refill you and refuel you, right? Because what we notice about that anxiety, fatigue, stress spiral, right, is it's very hard to find an entry point if we don't slow down and check in with ourselves of what's draining me and what can I do? So some components of good enough self-care are clear goals and intent, having some compassion for yourself, and being flexible and adaptive. So, this comes back to that point of just what you reflected on a moment ago of what was realistic for you in terms of self-care 6 months ago is, I can guarantee you, not going to be what's realistic for you now, right? If you are relying on your weekly, yoga class with friends, that's not going to be the same as doing yoga class over Zoom. That's going to be a wonderful complement to that, but we're probably going to need you to adapt and add some more connection or add some more relaxation, right? So be flexible and adaptable with yourself of how you're going to implement self-care now. And this bottom link is a wonderful compilation of hundreds of really well-researched, explained self-care coping resources, everything from free apps to articles to read to exercises to practice. It's an amazing resource. So I'm going to keep this here for folks. And again, you can always rewatch this to grab this link, or I'm happy to send you a copy of the slides as well. So again, this biggest component is we're going to talk about self-care is that you, right, are like a bucket or like a bank account. We've got withdrawals and we've got deposits. And when stress is withdrawing more than we can deposit, we need to implement good self-care. So self-care, right, is all about the science of well-being. And there's 4 core strategies for managing it, right? We've got those attention centering techniques. We've got expressive creative strategies. We've got reflection and exploration strategies, and we've got having healthy lifestyle. So these are, again, probably every therapist is going to give them different titles, even probably many research articles, we swap them out. But the core idea here is that you're going to be doing something that takes care of your present moment awareness, taking care of yourself in the now, responding to thoughts and feelings. You're going to be giving yourself a healthy outlet. You're going to be taking time to self-reflect and check in and have good boundaries and relationships. And then you're going to be taking care of your body, right? Because our mind and our body are not disconnected, right? A majority, we are very much interconnected. So I'm going to be talking about self-care from a cumulative stress perspective, because that's where I, very much believe we are existing right now. And lifestyle is a great entry point, right? So if we're looking kind of at that bottom left, right quadrant, that healthy lifestyle piece, and then combining it with a little bit of the other 3, but really focusing on healthy lifestyle, right? So taking some time to move your body every day. Again, I do not mean like going to buy a Peloton and doing a 45-minute spin class. I do not mean having to like go run 3 miles tomorrow like that. I mean like taking a walk, gently stretching your body. We also know some good benefits of doing a short burst of intense exercise. Like if you're getting really stressed at your desk, standing up and doing 5 jumping jacks really fast. Another one is rest. To rest is a radical action. It is incredibly anti-American in our culture, where we are really trained that to rest is to be unproductive, and to be unproductive is to be unworthy. And that is something that's going to keep stress response in overdrive for longer than it needs to be. Right. So to nap in the middle of your day, you could think of that like you're being a part of a revolution, right? To really say, okay, if I am tired, I allow my body to rest, is really transformational. Another one is to have a healthy routine, right? So routine covers like, okay, I make sure that I eat, enough food during the day to fuel my body. It also means setting boundaries, right? Work is our home and home is our work for many of us now. So that means, okay, just because my computer is available to me at 6 a.m. doesn't mean I check my email at 6 a.m. Another thing to routine or create, right, is a media schedule, right? How often are you looking at Twitter? How often are you looking at Instagram? And is that contributing to your feelings of well-being, or is it perhaps detracting for them? And setting a schedule for it is great, right? I am not ashamed to admit that I have my Instagram on parental controls on my phone, right? I am an adult woman and a mental health therapist, and I still need that support, right? I got my Instagram on a timer, and I couldn't be more thrilled about it because it just takes one less decision for me to make, and it helps me stay focused on my self-care. Another one is connection, right? So that kind of taps into this reflection and healthy lifestyle element, right? Is that when we monitor what makes us feel good and loved and supported, what also makes us feel creative and energetic through our relationships with other people, we become less stressed, right? So a great antidote to anxiety is connection. So spending time with supportive people, this also means participating in meaningful causes, right? Many of us were activated over events over the summer, over events related to the election or anything related to the pandemic, right? There's a great amount of need in our community for support. And a way that you can increase your feelings of connection as well as increasing your feelings of control, right, and power are connecting with a meaningful cause. And above always, right, keep it simple and make time for play, right? Make time for fun. So we're gonna take a mini self-care break, and I'm gonna guide you through 3 activities. I know it's 7:15 and I wanna leave us a little bit of time for questions. So I think we might end up doing just 2 of them, but I'm gonna talk you through all 3. So you're gonna need something to write with for at least one of them that we're gonna do. So again, an old receipt counts. If you're, remember the good old days of going to Target and just walking around for no reason, right? If you still got one of those receipts lying around, pull it up and you can use that. So the first one, again, as we talked about, is we're going to we're going to do an emotional agility exercise, just like I talked about at the beginning of our presentation. So emotional agility is the practice of facing our thoughts and feelings with curiosity and kindness, right? Notice that judgment is nowhere to be found. There's no wrong thought and there's no wrong feeling. Emotional agility is not a path towards a silver lining or a grin and bear it mindset, right? Something that I hope folks have noticed is that I have not once said, right, like, let's find what's been good about the pandemic, or let's find out, like, what are some of the like great things about being at home, right? We know that forced positivity is not helpful for stress reduction or overall well-being during times of challenge. It actually reduces our ability to be resilient if we force ourselves or others to find a silver lining. So emotional agility is not about noticing your emotions and then just being like, well, I'll be fine, or I can make it through. Emotional agility helps us turn on self-awareness, turn up self-compassion, and tap into a sense of meaning and purpose. So this emotional agility stress buster is from this wonderful woman named Susan David. She's a scientist, a psychologist who studies emotions and well-being and happiness. And she is she's the pioneer of emotional agility. And this is one of the ways she breaks down responding to stress from an emotionally agile perspective. So step 1 is acknowledge stress. Step 2 is create space between you and the feeling. Right? Give yourself a gap between what triggered you and how you respond to it. Step 3 is ask yourself, what is this stress trying to tell me? What function does it serve, right? That brings us all the way back to that first slide, right? WTF, what is this trying to signal to me? And step 4 is understand that it is how you are feeling, not who you are. So I want everyone to pick a situation that they've had lately that made them feel stressed, right? I'll talk us through one, but I want you to just pick a random one, right? It could be something at work. It could be something related to the pandemic. It could be something with your spouse or your roommate. Pick a recent scenario. So I'm going to do one about a really long to-do list. I think in pandemic, I lead a support group for moms at Virginia Hospital Center, and something that comes up for us a lot in that group is this idea of COVID busy, right? Like somehow there's more on the to-do list and different stuff on the to-do list than there was before. And it's got this anxious energy to it. So we're going to take that COVID busy to-do list example. So if I was going to do step 1, I would acknowledge my stress, right? I'd give myself space to simply feel that way. I might say that out loud, right, to myself or to my spouse or to my friend and say like, this COVID thing, I'm like feeling weirdly busy and it's stressing me out. Or I might just say it to myself in the moment when I'm making my list for the day or the week. I might say like, oh God, like this is a lot. This is a lot on my plate. And I think it might be a little overwhelming for me. I'm feeling the weight and the stress of it. Then if I were to go to step 2, right, create some distance between myself and this feeling. As I'm practicing that awareness, I'm going to connect to that part of me that's reflecting. That wise, calm part that exists in me and it exists in every single one of us, that is able to take deep breaths and is able to notice. So I might say something to myself like, okay, I have the power to decide how I'm going to act in this moment. I'm going to have the power to choose what's important to me. I won't get to choose everything that I do during my day, but I'm going to get to choose how I do it. And I'm also probably going to choose how I react to the rest of my day, knowing I'm busy. Like I can choose whether or not I procrastinate responding to all those emails until 7 p.m. The third part, right, is asking yourself, what is this telling me? What is this stress trying to signal me to, right? Again, if we're using my example of that to-do list, I might say, okay, this stress is telling me I need a little bit more balance in my life, a bit not more than I can chew, and I need to ask for help. I either need to get some of these tasks off my plate by tapping in a coworker or getting, asking my spouse for more help or, doing some, better scheduling during my day so I have a bit more balance or breaks in my afternoon, so that I can take things one step at a time and not feel overwhelmed by everything that's on my plate at once, because I'm going to have a little less on my plate. That's not always possible. So sometimes it might be, okay, I can't get all this stuff on my plate, but it's telling me that I need to do some more self-care when I do it. And that last one is understand that it is how you are feeling, not who you are, right? And a great sentence that summarizes all of that is to say, right, I am feeling stress, but I'm not defined by my stress. I'm feeling overwhelmed by this pandemic, right? But this pandemic does not get to determine how I respond to it, right? I'm going to act in a way that when I look back, that's what I want to see, right? So really reminding yourself you are so much more than this stress and you have the ability to respond to it. So come back to this, whether you talked it through when we did it or jotted it down. This is one that, I would say if you're going to take one thing away from today, I hope it's this exercise. The next one is a 60-second break. And this one I'm not going to do with you, but I'm going to leave with you. And you have copies for these whenever you want them. This is an in the moment exercise you do for something like short-term stress. When you get triggered, whether, I don't know, right? Like I love my dog. He's my favorite being in the world. But if anybody comes up to our door, he's going to let us know. And he's got a bark like a hound. It's really loud. And sometimes in the moment, if I'm really deep in work or I'm working with a client, I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing, right? I love my dog, but like, oh, I wonder what people are thinking. I'm kind of surprised he didn't bark during this presentation, frankly. Right. To help me stay calm and centered in those moments, I do this exercise, right? Is notice, right, that this sensation of like, oh, I'm embarrassed or this is stressful rises up. Take a pause and wait to react, right? And then you stay present by noticing the emotion, notice where your body is at, counting your breathing. And then you have an option to choose. Do you do what the emotion is acting or do you redirect? Right? So if this looks like getting really frustrated with your kid's Zoom school, right? You notice the irritability, you can't log in or the Teams isn't loading or that your kid's teacher, you're having trouble connecting with them for a conference. Right. You're doing all of that. Like, can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can you see me? I can't see you. You're getting that irritability bubbling up instead of snapping, right? And like really getting upset or saying my computer's not working or slamming it closed or snapping at your kid or snapping at your spouse or snapping at their teacher, right? Take a moment to pause, wait to react and say, okay, I'm noticing tension in my jaw. I've got a pit in my stomach. I'm clenching my fists and start to breathe. And then you can choose, okay, do I still feel like I need to snap or can I take this moment to say my tech isn't really working and I'm feeling stressed out? Can we reschedule or can you give me a moment? And then finally, this wheel of control exercise. And this is one I'm going to have a link to that anyone can access. And this is, again, in the slides. You can touch base with these on any time. And I have a video where I can guide you all through this if you want to access this later. But this is an exercise that helps us understand and identify what's within our control and what's outside of our control. So all you do is draw 2 circles on a piece of paper. I'm going to ask everyone to do that now. Let's draw 2 circles on your piece of paper. Smaller one on the center that says can't control, and a larger one on the outside that says can't control. And this sizing is intentional, right? Can control is not the larger outer circle, right? Can control is the inner, smaller, more intentional circle. So, right, some things that you might put in your can't control space is I can't control when this pandemic will end. Can't control what resources or supplies are available, right? Lest we ever forget that at one period of time, it was actually hard to get toilet paper. Like that was not long ago that we couldn't get toilet paper. I can't control when I get a vaccine, or when my parents get a vaccine, or when, if you have an at-risk spouse or child, I can't control when they get a vaccine. I also can't control other people's actions, right? Something you might put in your can control section is I can control my attitude, how much I help others, how much and what media I watch or read, and I can't control my support of what's important to me. And in that can control space, I can control how I take care of myself. Self-care is within your control. So those are just these 3, small, simple ways to touch down and practice self-care. And this last one, right, again, I would be remiss not to say, and then we can wrap up and go to questions for this last portion, is that you can access support and utilize resources. The next slide I'm going to share has a ton on there. And I would be remiss to say any resource that makes you compare yourself or your families to someone else's or presents an unrealistic ideal is not the right fit. If you're looking at any of these Instagrams or podcasts I share with you or books, and you're like, this is making me feel like garbage, like I'm not doing it good enough, theirs looks picture perfect, why can't my family practice more emotional agility? Pause, right? Like if you are getting stuck in self-comparison, take a pause and really ask yourself, okay, is this the right resource for me? So here's a big list of resources. Again, all of this will be available on this YouTube. If you want to take a screenshot of this slide, go ahead. These are all wonderful options that kind of range the spectrum of mental wellness and self-care, that talk about everything from trauma to using the body to help you access well-being, and also fun, lighthearted things as well. So here's one last self-compassion, self-reflection pause, right? Go back to that thing you wrote down at the beginning. What did you want to get out of this time? And use that to answer number 1, right? Did we hit that mark? What's the most important thing you're going to take with you today? What's the one area you want to focus on first? Right? Is it practicing that emotional agility? Is it giving yourself more rest? Is it simply recognizing and naming your stress when it shows up? How can you be mindful of self-criticism and setting unrealistic expectations for yourself as you try a different approach to managing your stress? Right? If you leave this presentation and then are like a bulldog with yourself, right, pushing yourself or pressuring yourself to be better or different, that's not going to be great either. And then finally, where can you learn more and get some more support if you need it? Right? You can go to NAMI, you can go to myself, you can go to any of those resources on the last slide. Give me just a moment or two to answer those. Okay, and then finally, just some last few takeaways. Focusing on your stress, focusing on yourself first is the only way to long-term stress reduction. Stress from the outside or stress from within impacts everything about our lives, and there's nothing wrong with you because of that. Your response to stress is normal. How it's functioning in your life is what matters. And reducing stress happens moment to moment throughout each day. It's not an overnight shift. So don't judge yourself or rush yourself. Practice accurate self-care and be curious and kind towards yourself. So I'll leave us just with this last slide of my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions if folks have them. I know we have just a couple moments left, but I'm happy to answer where I can.
MJ, thank you so much. I think that was a fantastic presentation. I think one thing that stood out to me is, I've definitely had that feeling of, oh, we've been in a pandemic for what, 10 months now. I should be used to this.
Yeah.
And sort of realizing, no, it's the cumulative stress that we have going on was definitely important for me to hear. So thank you. And thank you for all of those resources. Um, I did see a question. We had somebody ask, how do you understand what you need to get out of the overly stressed state that you were talking about?
What a
How do
good
you know what you
question.
need?
Totally. So one good way to check in with yourself, and I'm going to move back on some of these slides, is to look at something like these four core strategies, right? And say, okay, if I look at these strategies, where do I see an absence or a blank space in my life? Right. So, okay, am I feeling like I'm on edge, overwhelmed, and not sleeping? Okay, I'm probably going to be looking at something like that last quadrant. I need some more lifestyle support. Or if you're on the other end of feeling like I'm rushing through my day and I'm like falling down, collapsing on my pillow, and then waking up and doing it all over again, like I'm in like a bad, movie where I'm like repeating each day. What's that? Groundhog Day. Oh my God, embarrassing that took me so long. Right. You might be needing some of those attention and centering techniques. So it's using what you're seeing to find its complement. Right. So, okay, what am I seeing in my life on the stress response piece? And what would the balance for that look like? And just to plug on this, identifying those unmet needs is really hard, right? That is not an easy thing for I would say all of us, right? And again, particularly when we grow up in America, in Northern Virginia, that's a really go, go, go culture that puts a lot of emphasis on productivity and getting through things silently and not making a big stink if you're not feeling any type of way other than excellent. It's going to be hard to learn how to identify your unmet needs. So be patient with yourself. And just start with something like that 60-second break or something like emotional agility to say, okay, I'm feeling something rise up. If I pause just for a moment and I ask myself, what would help? What would I find? I hope that's useful.
Thank you. Um, just another question that I know we've gotten a few times in different presentations or situations. So, I guess from a family member's perspective, if you have a child or a sibling or a parent or somebody in your family who is maybe exhibiting some of those signs of potential stress overload, how do you sort of tell the difference between this is typical stress associated with an ongoing pandemic and they need some sort of extra support? Whether it's reaching out to a clinician, how do you sort of tell where that
Yeah,
line is?
I love that question. That's a really good one. And I think one that we need to be really asking ourselves often. And something that I tell my clients and I talk about, publicly is that idea of, okay, is it getting in your way? Or is it getting in your child's way of functioning where they need to function? Right. So something like if, I work with a lot of adolescent girls and high school and college working on perfectionism, right? And something that we'll talk about with stress overload is saying, okay, are you able to go to class, or are you able to do your academic functioning? But are you also able to socially function, right? Do you have friends that you can call on and that you spend time with each week? Are you functioning from a physical perspective? Okay, are you eating multiple times a day? Are you sleeping? Are you able to move your body at least once a day for, 30 minutes or less? Right? Some of us over function in one area of our lives, right? And many for us, again, in the Northern Virginia area, see a lot of over functioning in school and work. And then when we're stressed, under function in areas like self care, physical wellness, emotional wellness, and relational wellness. So, what I tell folks again, right, is how you can determine the difference between healthy stress and unhealthy stress is in healthy stress, it's usually helping us adapt and respond, right? We're probably functioning pretty well on all burners. We might feel overwhelmed, but we're still doing pretty well. When it's unhealthy stress, you're seeing areas of someone's life diminish or become pretty noticeably impacted. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I don't know if I saw any more questions in the chat, but we are just past 7:30. So I just want to, if you had your contact information up there, I'm sure people can reach out if they have other questions. We'll make sure to share your slides with our email list as well, if that's okay with you, so that
Yeah.
and as with the link to this video if anyone missed it. Thank you again so much for joining us, everyone. Again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to MJ. Feel free to reach out to us at NAMI Northern Virginia. And in case you missed the announcement at the beginning, I just wanted to let everyone know tomorrow is our Mental Health Advocacy Day. If you can join us, that'd be great. We're going to make a big push to call our local legislators and stress the important need for mental health as a priority this year and mental health funding. So if you can join us, check out the calendar on our website for more details about that event, or on our Facebook page. We have more information about how to get involved there. And we hope to see you at our next monthly meeting, where we'll have a NAMI Ending the Silence presentation for parents. So thank you again, MJ, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was good to be with you all. Have a really great night.
Thanks.